Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another live Nevada Lithium event. Today, I'm joined with Steve Rentschler, CEO of Nevada Lithium, to hear further context on the recent announcement of a new relationship with Korean lithium producer Hydrolithium. As always, feel free to submit your questions in the chat box, which can be found in the bottom right corner of your screen. Also note that this is being recorded and the replay will be made available shortly after we conclude here today. Steve, thank you for joining us today. You've got two major developments happening almost simultaneously: the Hydrolithium relationship and the U.S. government's potential equity stake in Thacker Pass. Walk us through how you see these pieces fitting together and what this moment means for Nevada Lithium and the broader critical minerals landscape.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time to join me this afternoon. There's been a lot of things that have been going on over the course of the past 7-8 weeks, I'd say, in the lithium industry and also with Nevada Lithium. And I wanted to take the opportunity to basically get some comments in while the news is relatively fresh. I wish I could have gotten this done last week, but we just had a lot of other things going on as well. But I'm going to take the opportunity to just sort of recap where we are. I noticed that we continue to get new faces to the story. And as I said, over the course of the past 2 months, there has been a lot been going on. And I think you'll see how if I go sort of step by step over, again, the last 3 announcements we've had, you'll see how these things all dovetail together and sort of, I think it'll become apparent, the kinds of things that we're thinking about at Nevada Lithium and what it means for shareholders. So to recap, 2 months ago, we came out with our updated PEA, again, which I would ask that you go back and look at the investment metrics of that. And I think it stacked up very, very well against anything else in Nevada and in other parts of the world, some of the other projects. We have a very, very large lithium carbonate project scheduled for over 62,000 tons of production a year, mine life of over 60 years. Along with on the order of 130,000, 140,000 tons of boric acid as a byproduct credit. All of this gave us, a plus 30% IRR and net present value that was $6 billion, initial capex, around $2 billion. So a very nice NPV to capex ratio, a payback, under 4 years in the threes, very, very healthy. All the types of things that you would want to see to get attention on your project and to increase its odds of, not only the project coming to fruition, but getting additional partners, getting people who are interested in what you're doing, size, grade, economics, all these things sort of married together, I think have put us in a very, very good spot. Now, we noticed, obviously, there's been a lot of talk about strategic minerals in the U.S., it's not just rare earths, right? So I'm talking specifically about things that are different than rare earths here. But by the same token, these are the kinds of materials which the U.S. government is vulnerable, supply lines. And it could be either in the processing of it, could be in just the original deposits. A lot of different things go into it. But we had seen basically some other companies start talking about, the availability in their deposits of some of these strategic minerals. And you'll sort of remember maybe from years ago, one of the things that we were thinking about as another byproduct was potash fertilizer, which is in fact on the critical materials list of strategic minerals for the U.S. But there are also a bunch of other ones, and 2 of them are cesium and rubidium. And these are, I will call them specialty, let's call them specialty products, minerals, things that, are not measured in millions and millions of tons of production, but they, and used in small quantities, have some very, very significant properties that are desirable. And it seems to be technology is really one of the areas where these materials shine. I had given a video about a week ago, maybe 10 days ago, and where I sort of, in very broad brush strokes, sort of outlined, the value that potentially is there. The numbers get very big very quickly. And so I didn't want to, show you my spreadsheets, but sort of I laid out to everybody that you could do the math yourself. It's not hard. Even when you talk about, very low percentages like parts per millions, we're talking 100, 300 parts per million kind of things. When you basically expand that by the tonnages that we have at Bonnie Claire, so, say 30 million tons of resource, you see how the potential basically grows. We're not, again, talking about becoming a critical minerals company. We're lithium and we're boron, and all the rest of this, though, is just it's additional icing on the cake. It's optionality, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So, if we can basically find a way to get these, metals out for not much more money, this is, again, it's just all gravy. And we'll look at this as sort of separate projects within the project. So I found it very, very exciting because we had the minerals there. So that, guys looked through the assays again. We found that the critical minerals are basically with our high grade lithium and boron. So that's the material that we would be going after first. If you looked at basically the news release that we had done 2 news releases ago, you'll see some scatter plots that Jeff had put in there that show, how these all correlate. So it's not like we're going to be going out of our way or would have to go out of our way to grab this stuff. Basically, the way I look at it is we're going to be throwing 8,000 tons of dirt through the plant a day, and this material is going to be coming with it. One of the neat things that we found out was that, through some testing that Cameco had done for us up in British Columbia, think about the way this recovery system works. We put the slurry into the plant, we hit it with acid a couple of times, try to liberate the boron, then the lithium, get rid of some nasty stuff. And then when you have what's left is a pregnant leach solution, okay? Well, we found that the cesium, rubidium are still present there. So they're not being destroyed, they're not being locked up or whatever. So that, to me, puts us even farther ahead in the process. I think that there's going to be value in these materials in one of 2 ways, either in pure economics. We put some sort of a circuit in, and we extract the metals out. By the way, I use metals and minerals interchangeably. I probably shouldn't, but just so everybody knows what I'm talking about. And potentially upgrade them and send them off for sale. Now, the cost of that, we don't know. But I would say when you look again at the selling prices of these specialty metals, very, very high, measured in hundreds of dollars a gram, things like that. Again, you could do the math and you see that there's a lot of wiggle room to bring additional economics to the existing project. But the other way in which they add value is because they are a point of such interest, particularly now. And it's the way in which they bring attention from different entities, whether or not it's the US government or whether or not it's potential strategic partners or new relationships that are being developed with people who are able to try to extract this for us economically, or to set up basically supply lines in concert with the US government in a way to strengthen relationships. And of course, that's sort of what is leading into the announcement of last week, which is our new relationship with Hydrolithium out of Korea, specifically their CEO, Dr. Won Chang, who I've found to be a real pleasure to work with, and someone who I think is going to be very, very helpful to Nevada Lithium, potentially in a number of ways. So by way of background, I just tell you a little bit about Hydrolithium. They're listed on the Korean Stock Exchange, and they already produce lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide. They have a plant set up in Korea for about 3,600 tons of, I think it's lithium carbonate a year. They're constructing a second plant, 10,000 tons going to 50,000 tons a year. And the way that you should think about this company, at least right now, is that they have DLE technology. Okay, so you may say, oh, well, hold on a second. Bonnie Claire is not looking at direct lithium extraction because we don't have brines. Well, this is sort of the dynamic nature of basically the lithium industry, and how I would argue that technology is starting to blur the lines between the differences of, say, salars or brine operations and operations potentially like ours, right? So clay-based, let's just call them like that. And that's because as the technology continues to evolve, and let's just call it DLE technology, it becomes a question of where do you apply it potentially in our recovery stream, right? So although we may not be taking a brine directly out of the ground and just processing it through DLE, the sort of analog I think about is that at some point in time, we do have a solution that is full of lithium and other things such as cesium and rubidium. And perhaps the DLE technology is another way to extract more value. And this doesn't mean at this point in time that we're thinking about taking the floor developed spreadsheet, or pardon me, flow sheet that is in our PEA and not using it. But this is optionality. If in fact different things can be brought to bear through a new technology that perhaps reduces the reagent use, that reduces the residence time while the desired minerals are unlocked, has lower capital costs, all of these types of things. Well, these are the things that we want to know, because as we go from PEA to PFS, we're going to evaluate all of them. Now, as I said, at this point in time, right, we're not looking to become a primary cesium or rubidium producer. So I would say the way to think about this kind of thing is, we have an inflow of material coming in. We already know how to basically unlock the lithium boron, bring down a lot of the impurities that we want. But there may be a way to basically just stick in circuits, right? Just basically, let's turn the pipe 90 degrees, put the flow of solids or semi-solids, whatever it's going to be, into another recovery type of a thing, bring it back into the main circuit, on and on and on. And at this point in time, as I said, cesium and rubidium look like they're pretty much no-brainers to try to capture. I still think that we have a good chance with getting the potassium out. Again, potash fertilizer is on the critical minerals list. And these are the kinds of things that will just continue to build into the optionality at Bonnie Claire. Now, I want to make sure, again, particularly for people who are relatively new to the story, that when I talk about optionality, I have a certain take on that word. Right? It comes from sort of my investing background on the buy side, which is you want to have as much optionality as possible, because these projects, okay, it's all about de-risking things, really, in every facet of the project development, whether it's the geology, whether or not it's the metallurgical recovery, whether it's the financing, all of this kind of stuff, right? You're basically one foot in front of the other in as methodical a way as you possibly can, trying to bring down basically what are unknowns to quasi-knowns to relative levels of certainty, et cetera. The more avenues of or more pivot points that you have, the better, because if something were to go wrong, you can pivot and you're not completely out of the game. And that's what I think of when I talk about optionality, okay? Optionality at Bonnie Claire also, frankly, is something I've talked about since the very beginning, which is that at a high enough lithium price, we've got lithium mineralization that comes to surface. And it could very well be economic in a different area of the project. Remember, again, Bonnie Claire is the size of Manhattan Island. There's plenty of room to move around. We also have a structure where we think it looks like the potential for brine might exist. Don't know what the possibility is, but it's optionality. Again, it's better than not having it. And that's the way I think about these recent announcements with the critical minerals. So I just want to make sure people understood that. We're not talking about rolling the dice here or anything like that, or playing the options market. It's just these are added potential avenues for additional value that we're going to be looking at. Now, if I go back to hydrolithium for a minute, I just wanted to say a little bit about the CEO, because one of the areas that really interested me was Dr. Chan, who is the CEO, his background. Dr. Chan was with POSCO, right? Huge Korean steelmaker. I think it's been called the most competitive steelmaker in the world for 12 years in a row, $6 billion in sale. Basically, I would say it's a Korean, not a gemstone, but it's the apple of their eye, right? It's a very, very well thought of company. Well, it also produces lithium, which a lot of people I don't think really understand, but POSCO has got mining rights, and they've got upgrading rights. And, they're producing, I think, 40,000 tons of lithium a year. They're a pretty big lithium producer. Dr. Chan was the one who developed basically the technology that they rely upon. He also built a lot of their demonstration plants and their larger plants. He basically operated them. So this man has got many, many talents and an understanding of how the technology potentially starts. And the reason I say the reason it starts is because in 2016, Dr. Chan retired, and he's an entrepreneurial kind of guy, started Hydrolithium, and he continued to develop basically the technology that POSCO uses, but specifically to go after basically brines that have got higher levels of impurity in them. And most of the time, what those are is like calcium and magnesium. And you'll see in the U.S. A lot of the brines, a lot of the materials, we have a lot of it. It's the kind of thing that his evolving technology could potentially take on. So I take a lot of comfort in the expertise, not only in what Hydrolithium has done in the past through Dr. Chan, but how I would say the technology is revolutionary, but it's certainly evolutionary. So it's a CULX technology that he's talking about right now, and not to go into total details because, of course, you all know I'm not a metallurgist. But think about not using adsorbents, not using membranes, et cetera, but using some very environmentally benign materials, some air, some electricity, different types of things like that I think would definitely be viewed positively when it came to the development of Bonnie Claire, if all of this should pan out. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think when you have the technology that's there, it's obviously not lost on me that Dr. Chan has a long relationship with POSCO. It's not lost on me that POSCO clearly has a relationship with the Korean government. And it's not lost on me that given what's going on in the U.S., Korea very recently came to the White House with Donald Trump and committed to massive amounts of infrastructure, co-development, all these kinds of things that we're seeing from different parts of the world in an effort to get around basically U.S. imposed tariffs. So there are obviously, this is again at the very beginning. I have a lot of hope here. I don't want to dissuade anybody from that hope, but I want people to be realistic. These types of things tend to take time. However, we're already at a point where, again, we know that we have the critical minerals in our pregnant leach solution, and the starting point, therefore, is a much easier place to start from than if we were just trying to apply this against the dirt that came out of the ground in Bonnie Claire. So again, very excited for this relationship. I will keep everybody updated, obviously, as we're able to. And this could take in a lot of different forms. And we'll see, we will see. Certainly can't commit to anything at this point in time, but I think there's a very, very great opportunity for extra value. So I may as well just keep rambling on here for the last couple of minutes of my monologue here. And that's what I think we're seeing now with the U.S. government. And this is the kind of thing that I've been talking about, I thought would start to happen as soon as Donald Trump got elected. And it has to do with the establishment of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund. And I think this is one of these types of areas where, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, and it's a duck, right? We've seen a number of different things happen, of course, over the last few months, that some have been, relatively, I'd say, I don't want to say vanilla cake type of a thing, but standard kinds of things, maybe, taking 10%, the U.S. government taking 9.9 or 10%, say, in Intel, right? I think that was in August. Then we had the whole NVIDIA and AMD kind of thing where in exchange for export licenses, the U.S. government gets 10, 15%, I think, of, is essentially the revenue from Chinese, sales to China of those chips. In the U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel agreement, it came to be, and the U.S. got a golden share in there, right? It's essentially gave the U.S. government a right to basically not allow a certain number of things, moving the headquarters, renaming the company, has basically got the ability to stop a reduction in workforce or CapEx, all that kind of thing. So that's sort of a different flavor. And of course, we had MP Materials not long ago, so Mountain Pass, which I think is $400 million, something like that, whatever. The point is, right, two things. Again, all different things. Can you call them sovereign wealth funds? Is it not? Does it really matter? I'm not sure. The way it's looking like now with the stake that the government is saying it wants in Thacker Pass, with relationship to, I think, basically redoing those loan commitments that were there. My understanding, and I don't have any friends in the company or nor in the government to tell me precisely what's going on, but my understanding is that, the equity, the warrants, the equity, however this is going to manifest itself, is basically because of wanting to basically redo those loans, because there's some concern with low lithium prices. What would be the ability of Lithium Americas to be able to pay it? And I don't want to comment on that because I don't know. I'm not deep into their financials. But that's sort of the scuttlebutt. And the reason I really wanted to bring that up is because if that's so, it's telling me that the U.S. government definitely understands the necessity for some sort of a viable lithium price for these projects, and therefore the industry in the U.S. to move forward, right? We've talked about this many times, yet I'm still asked about it. Of course, lately it came out as when we did our PEA, we used $24,000 a ton for lithium carbonate prices, which is consistent with essentially everybody else in Nevada, but it's not consistent with spot prices, right? Which are now still, I think, above $10,000 a ton. But the reason, as I always say, that it really doesn't matter is because at $10,000 a ton, none of these projects is going to work. And if you believe in the lithium industry and you believe that EVs are the key to the demand going forward, the economics do not work on these projects at $10,000 a ton. You need to get up to 25,000, where it becomes, on a risk-adjusted basis, a risk that people are going to want to take. And therefore, I'm very comfortable with the investment metrics coming out of the PEA. To me, if the U.S. government is recognizing this in one way or another and saying, hey, maybe we should be talking about redoing these loans, it's a good thing. We don't know how this is all going to manifest itself. However, I would say when you see the approach that I think that's being taken by the U.S. government, in all of these different areas, right? So semiconductor, steel, Mountain Pass with, some of the rare earths, if it's going to be Lithium Americas with the lithium, you see that it's a very wide and I would say very, encompassing approach, which is different, in my opinion, than what we had seen earlier under the Biden administration, where so much of this had to be something that was relatively near-term commercialization, something that, had something that you could sell to consumers to get their money back. It was all predicated, I shouldn't say all, but very much predicated on recycling, et cetera. Now you're starting to see the understanding, in my opinion, about the need to basically get all the way to ground level. Now, obviously, the projects, the companies that are getting attention from the U.S. government are the bigger ones. Thacker Pass has been around for a long time. It's been developed for a long time. The billion-dollar companies, you would assume, are going to be the ones who are going to get the most attention first. But I don't think it's done. And, we're doing our best to make sure we get in front of the proper people who can help us get to the decision makers. I will tell you, I have been speaking with U.S. government about different types of things. There's nothing definitive here. I don't want anybody to think that there is. However, once again, it's better than not talking to people. It's just been a very, very dynamic, I want to say, last 6 months. And I think so much of it is predicated upon this push for secure supply lines in the U.S. And the tentacles are essentially expanding. And what I'm hoping is that we're going to be able to take advantage of that with Nevada Lithium and Bonnie Claire. So again, lithium prices, I think, are going to have to come back. I think the world's going to realize you can't have a bifurcated pricing system. If you don't want to have essentially Chinese related lithium in US EVs, you're going to have to come up with alternative sources. I think that's sort of, again, what you're seeing with Lithium Americas and Thacker Pass and GM. I don't think it's over yet. Again, demand for lithium still looks to be 2.5, 3 million tons a year. Out only a couple of years away. If we're 1.5 million tons now, and you're basically going to take out, I don't know how much of it because of China relationships, all of the projects, as far as I consider, are going to need to be developed in Nevada. So we're going to have the ups and downs with the prices. We understand that, but the key is we want to keep de-risking as much as possible, wait for the price to come through, wait for offtake agreements, wait for the U.S. and actually the global EVs to sort of sort themselves out. The Chinese continue to sell them at a tremendous pace. The penetration rate in everywhere except basically the U.S. has been tremendous. However, the cars continue to get better, and you're starting to see U.S. Cars being released. You've heard me speak before about the fact that I'm certain that U.S. car companies bought the Chinese technology a couple of years ago and reversed engineered it. And I'm sure you're going to continue to see all of this, come to be developed and brought to the U.S. markets. So a lot going on. I think I've covered essentially what I wanted to mention about the Nevada Lithium side of it, as well as the thoughts on the U.S. government side and what we're seeing there. And at this point in time, Kyle, if there's anything that people would like to talk about, I'd be happy to try to elaborate to the best
For
of my
sure.
ability.
No, thank you for laying the foundation and your insights. We do have a lot of questions in the chat, so we'll kick off from the first one submitted. Peter Epstein is asking, do other Western U.S. lithium projects, clay-hosted or brine, with or without DLE tied to them, have cesium or rubidium in addition to lithium?
Yeah, I know Surge does. Surge Battery Metals does. They had actually made the announcement that predated ours. So there's one. Now, anything that's close to production, like Thacker or whatever, I don't know. And I don't know about like Clayton Valley, et cetera. I haven't heard of any other announcements. And frankly, I would think that would be something that people would be bringing out, if they could. But that's just me thinking out loud. But that's what I know of. I know Surge does, yeah.
When will Bonnie Claire start production?
Look, here's always my caveat. If financing is not an issue, I think we get Bonnie Claire into production in 2031. And the reason, and here's just my rough timeline going out forward. As we go through to pre-feasibility, right? And where we are specifically right now is looking at some studies we want to do, looking at some basically firms as well as to who do we want to author the pre-feasibility study. Coming out of the PEA, there was a recommended scope of work that the authors of the PEA, and that would have been GRE, thought would be necessary to basically get us to a pre-feasibility stage. A lot of that is drilling, quite honestly, and drilling is the kind of thing that we know we could double up with the number of drills and cut the timeline down, right? We don't just have to drill one hole at a time. We know rig availability would be there, and we have a pretty good handle on how quickly the rigs can get down to the depth we need, et cetera. Metallurgy, we would need advanced metallurgy. It's the kind of thing we could put a bigger team on. I would assume it would still be Fluor at this point in time using their technology, that kind of thing. The big thing is really going to be what eventually is decided on with regards to a test of our mining method, which is borehole mining. Again, this is the methodology that is essentially used by Cameco at Scar Lake, and Orano is just starting it up with their Denison JV. And that's just rotating that drill string, essentially a big oil and gas rig, rotating a drill string with high pressure water coming out. It erodes the sides, of the well and basically drops a bunch of mud down to the bottom. The mud gets pumped up into the plant, and then we start the whole recovery process. Do we need to do a test of that for the PFS? We're getting mixed answers on that, and that's one of the things that we want to determine, because if we don't, then obviously that gets us to feasibility relatively quicker. When you think about Bonnie Claire sort of holistically, right? We don't have an open pit. We're not talking about having to lay back, and dig through overburden to get down to the ore. That's sort of one of the beauties of the borehole mining. You get there very, very quickly to your targeted depths. So really the construction is a plant, right? Plant's a big shell. Outside, inside, it's just basically recovery units, basically loops of systems that go in a very methodical way that can be built in a modular way, et cetera, to which you hook up to, your basically your infrastructure, the rest of your utilities, et cetera. And of course, as you've heard me speak many times, Bonnie Claire is 20 yards off of State Route 95. We have high tension lines going over top of us, another set coming through, et cetera. Water is still something that needs to be resolved, as basically almost all these other projects, et cetera. But the point of my telling you all of this is that you could go from pre-feas into feasibility very, very quickly. And in my opinion, you could easily start construction as you're going through feasibility. I know there have been many projects in the past that have gone directly from pre-feas into feasibility. This will be a risk and reward kind of a trade-off. The reason I bring up the risk reward is because of the one big beautiful bill that's part of the U.S. legislation. Essentially, it was just passed a few months ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, something like that. But the potential for having the manufacturing side of Bonnie Claire, so let's just call it the plant. And now this is just Steve's opinion, right? This is nobody else's opinion yet. If that's in fact a manufacturing plant, we have bonus depreciation, we have advanced depreciation, we have expensing instead of capitalization, a lot of things that could potentially impact, the taxes at Bonnie Claire. And of course, we measure our NPVs on an after-tax, 8% after-tax evaluation metric. So it would have a direct impact. And I'll just tell you that in my very, very rough calculations, it could be worth hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, one of the things that we're going to do is look into trying to get basically somebody other than Steve to give not an opinion, but basically guidance on that. And we're doing that right now to see if we can't get a little more of a handle around that. But obviously, that would be important to a strategic partner or anybody else. So that's why, as I say to you, I want to try to get this, it looks like I think 2031. It's either construction's got to start before, maybe 2030, or you got to be going into production before 2031. We'll get all of this figured out. But then that's what we're going to shoot for, because I think that could be potentially a pretty big prize. So we're looking again at any way we can to basically, if we get delayed because of financing or anything else, look at ways to basically double up. We'll certainly be looking at with potential partners who have the ability to build things. That makes perfect sense. And again, that doesn't mean that we have these partners in our hip pockets. I'm just saying is that this is logically how you see a lot of these big kinds of projects get built. All of these kinds of things to advance that timeline and keep it in that time frame. So hopefully,
Speaking of partners, could the relationship with Hydrolithium eventually become a partnership where they help develop a pilot plant for a feasibility study?
It's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that the relationship, and I'm just trying to again be very careful. I don't want to call anything a partnership. Yeah, we have a relationship with Hydrolithium that I'm hoping could manifest itself into a partnership in many, many different ways. Yeah, perhaps not just with them, but with Hydrolithium's ability to bring other players to the table. If you read the news release that I put out last week, you see I worded it very carefully, the kinds of things that I wanted to say about Hydrolithium and its CEO. I can't tell you how much this man has impressed me, and I think the depth of his relationships go. Now, that doesn't mean anything. However, I think that if we can prove that the relationship, if the technology works, with Bonnie Claire's material, I mean, I have no idea. Perhaps it could work on the clay itself, on the initial slurry. But I will tell you, we're not. We're looking more at the back end. But it's the kind of thing that if it's proven and we see the magnitude of this project, and look, Bonnie Claire, in my opinion, is a strategic asset of the U.S. I mean, again, we're still open in three directions, folks, from an exploration standpoint. If push comes to shove and this thing wants to be upsized, I don't think resource is going to be a deterring factor. And now I know Jeff will probably get on me for saying, but we're open in three directions, all right, for thousands of meters, et cetera, kind of thing. And our guys still don't think that they found the highest grade material, basically at the bottom of let's call it the basin. Mm-hmm. So we're in a great position right now, but that kind of thing, that kind of gravitas that the project has, big, great economics, the potential for more, applying technology to it in a great place, best mining jurisdiction. I don't even think it's arguable anymore, but in the world perennially, that's the kind of thing that gets attention. And things can happen in many ways, right? So I am hoping that we do have some sort of a partnership come out of this with Hydrolithium. And I know that they're very, very keen to apply their technology to a lot of the basically high impurity brines or pregnant leach solutions that may exist in other places. So there's a lot here that we could do with them.
You mentioned the technology might not work, and an individual in the chat's wondering if the new technology underperforms or costs escalate, what is the fallback options?
Well, I'm talking about the new technology here, right? So I don't even want to talk about it in terms of a fallback position, right? And that's one of the things. Again, I want to be very, very clear. This technology is not supplanting the floor developed flow sheet that we have for the lithium and the boron. Okay, this is additive. So specifically, we're looking at the cesium, the rubidium, right? Go after that. Can we get that out of the pregnant leach solution in a way that's economical? That would be the first thing that I would say. I do think that we're going to find out very quickly what the parameters of lithium and boron extraction are, though, as well. If for some reason, and I mentioned some of these things before, like residence time, in terms of, and that's sort of like how long does your solution have to be exposed to a reagent? Okay, the shorter that sort of circuit is, the better. You think about it because your throughput increases. Perhaps the ability to change the reagents. Perhaps I don't know, all sorts of different things. But that's all gravy right now. There is no fallback position because we haven't changed our position. And that's one thing I just want to make clear again to people. If Hydrolithium can grab the cesium and rubidium, I'm not saying that we wouldn't have Fluor look at it too, but then we've got two options, right? Two potential ways to go. And again, that goes down to the whole thing about optionality and de-risking. This is precisely what I'm talking about.
Right. Thank you. Any updates on the potential for obtaining water rights?
No, the answer is there is no update right now. This is what I would just say to people with regards to the water rights. The state of Nevada has to figure out a way to get all these over allocations taken care of. All of these projects are going to require tremendous amounts of water. There's just no way around it. And obviously, you need to be cognizant of using neighbors' water. The overall impact over time to the aquifers, things like that. So I always tell people, remember, one of the nice starting points about where we are is, first of all, we don't have nearby neighbors. And second of all the water we have is brackish. Okay, so we're not talking about using potable water. There's no agriculture in the water. You couldn't use the water coming out of Bonnie Claire nearby, et cetera. And as an example, use pivot irrigation on alfalfa or something like that if you wanted. There's just too much salt on it. So there's really not a lot of uses for it. But water rights, it's one of those things. You got X amount of dollars to do things, and water rights can be very expensive. I do know that the state, is going to have to look at things where, basically water rights holders who don't have any use for it and can't find a buyer for it can't essentially, extort's the wrong word, but hold up all of these projects coming forward by sort of being the last person standing. And I don't know how this is going to evolve. It's a very tricky political kind of thing. But in general, when you talk about the fact that all of these areas where the projects are basically on what's called an over-allocated basin, right? So they say, the aquifers recharge at a rate of whatever, 10 feet a year, and there's already 12 feet, being used a year. You're over-allocated. Obviously, I'm making this, oversimplifying this, right? But then the state, right? And again, remember what Nevada is. It's, the fourth largest gold and silver producing country in the world. They know what they have to do to basically make short-term impacts, such as mining, which may be 60 or 100 years, consider a short-term impact on the rechargeability of the aquifers. They know how to do that. So I have great faith that all of this is going to be worked out because, again, the governors, again, just made it very clear. They want this lithium industry to not just survive, but to thrive in Nevada. You've heard me speak about this before. They're busy trying to swipe all the high-tech manufacturing that they can from California. I don't know if you've seen sort of what's coming out of Las Vegas, but Las Vegas is not doing well, and half the state's workforce is in the in the hospitality industry. So the governor, he definitely wants to basically get into as many different things as he possibly can. There is there's a bit of an impasse, I want to say, at the state legislature level. You've got mixed, you got Republicans and you got Democrats. But, just in terms of a way forward for the state, it seems pretty clear to me that mining is not going away. Mm-hmm. So again, long-winded way of saying, no, we don't have water rights. It's not the highest thing on my list right now. You take dollars away that we think are probably put to better use. And we've often talked about the different ways that we can get value out of Bonnie Claire. Do we do it alone? Okay, sure. We could try to build it alone, go through all of the dilution, et cetera, or over time build a team, et cetera. Is it more probabilistic that we end up with a partner some way? We sell offtake, we do. I'd say all of those avenues are more probable than our building it alone. And I would say that all of those avenues probably come in with more funding. People perhaps who've got more weight, political gravitas, et cetera, that kind of a thing than Nevada Lithium has at this time. And I think that's where you would see probably a natural move towards going after things like water rights. And just think it's a little bit farther in the future than where we are now.
Gotcha. Another question here. Why hasn't Albemarle, who has an operating lithium mine in Nevada, invested in Lithium Americas or other promising lithium juniors nearby their Silver Peak complex?
Well, I can't talk obviously for Albemarle, but I mean, I would just say there's some obvious differences in that, Silver Peak's 5,000, it's a 5,000 ton, lithium brine operation. Pretty sure too that the stuff still comes to surface. These evaporation ponds, they're not going to be around, much longer. You can't even get away really with that in South America anymore because of how much water you're basically just throwing away. But I mean, again, that's a brine operation. And so you're talking about, Lithium Americas is an open pit. You're talking about us. We're, a borehole mining thing. And again, we're not talking about a brine. We're talking about, a sediment, a clay. So I don't know the extent to which Albemarle sees it as a natural fit, nor do I know what they have looking at overseas. I just think that the number of places, like you hear about the smackover, right, in the brine. And I know that the energy companies have a lot of that, right? Because they're all depleted hydrocarbon reservoirs. And that looks like that's the next sort of big thing. This looks like where the DLE is finally going to emerge. I would think years ago, you thought it was going to be like the Salton Sea, right over there, controlled thermal, et cetera. And we're still waiting for that to come on. But I would say is that if Albemarle is going to take a look at something, they should take a look at something like us. I mean, when I look at the Standard Lithium's, I think it was the feasibility study just came out, was updated on the smackover. Pretty sure it was a feasibility study. I'm looking at the investment metrics. I'll take Bonnie Claire's all day long, and I would hope Albemarle would too. So, you just don't know where potential partnerships are going to emerge from. And it's, the unfortunate thing is that, again, I can't tell people everything that, we're up to as a company. And by the same token, I don't want to try to, imply that means there's something imminent, because frankly, there isn't. It doesn't mean that there isn't stuff that's going on. But it's going to happen when it does. These things just evolve. And again, when you see an announcement that's made on a Tuesday, it doesn't mean that everything just got figured out on Monday. These kinds of relationships take a long time. And I will tell you that we've had some relationships going on for a long time with people. So I think that, we're going to see things in this very dynamic industry going forward.
Speaking of dynamic industry, if the U.S. DOE or DOD were to put a floor price in for lithium carbonate for Lithium Americas or any other companies, what price might the floor be?
I think it's going to have to be $25,000 a ton for carbonate. Again, if you take a look in particular at everything that's going on in Nevada, right? So, again, everybody says, oh, the DLE, well, DLE, I'm sorry, it's not commercialized. And as I said, if you just take a look at what was going on in the smackover, which I would argue is supposedly, that's the poster child for, for DLE in the US. the metrics are, whatever. But again, people also, when they hear about hundreds of thousands of tons of production a year, like, well, that's going to destroy the market. Well, again, getting back to global demand for EVs, and now, of course, for the stationary batteries and what's coming all out with AI and all this sort of stuff, you need to have these big projects that can do hundreds of thousands of tons a year. But there aren't going to be that many of them. So the point is, I think Nevada is going to continue to be the epicenter of the lithium industry in the U.S. You're not going to have the amounts of the hard rock, the spodumene, the pegmatites that you're seeing in Quebec or in Australia, that kind of stuff. The geology in the U.S. is predicated on these volcanics. A bunch of volcanoes are just blowing their tops off. We think there's one was right next to us, and that's how we got all of ours, essentially, into the basin. And if that's the case, that you'll see all of these, let's call them the clay deposits to make it simpler. You'll see all of them gravitating towards that $24,000, ton pricing in their PEAs, et cetera, going forward, to get investment metrics of, 20% and more. I think we had the highest at like 32, 33%. But you need that kind of return, I would argue, to get people to make the leap of faith, to get involved with these. These are not small projects. These are not, I don't consider these to be mega projects, certainly not ours. And I've had that discussion with many people over time. I mean, mega projects to me are $10 billion offshore oil and gas wells, or Jansen's potash mine, that kind of stuff. I mean, these are manageable projects, but they're still billions of dollars worth of projects. And you need to have decent metrics, long lives, high RRs, quick paybacks, all that kind of thing. And I would say that plus $20,000 lithium kind of a floor, it does it for you. The other thing is that, if the government were to set some sort of a floor or whatever, it might unlock the ability to get offtake agreements. I don't know, perhaps with the government, as an example, as opposed to necessarily, other entities that, are trying obviously to minimize the price that they pay. And I have often told the car companies, you've heard me tell this story before in the past, you got to watch what you wish for. Everybody wants to try to, sell me your material for the cheapest price possible. Well, it's not going to do you any good if everybody's bankrupt, right? Nobody's getting it out of the ground. So it's a weird kind of a potential relationship with off-takers. But, the U.S. government coming in and it's rather overtly or even indirectly establishing some sort of a lithium price floor, I think would be a good thing. I think it would make things a lot easier to come up with unique solutions to basically the financing. It's a problem for all junior developers. I mean, and we're not alone with this, obviously. This is just, financing is always going to be a tough thing in the mining industry. That's just the reality.
Thank you for that, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Still quite a bit more questions here. We'll try and get to as many as possible. We do only have 12 minutes left. If this is a clay-based deposit, how will the processing deal with all the other metals, some deleterious, that will be released?
Well, so I think we're talking probably about the tailings. So, I mean, we're going to have a tailings impoundment area. It's going to be dry stack tailings. So we're not looking at re-injecting them. That was something sort of the first iteration with hydraulic borehole mining as a way to, basically put some of them. But if I recall correctly, there was some issue we thought about perhaps they would be swelled, because even though we took the water out of them to dry stack them, and remember, we want to recirculate as much water as possible, you still wouldn't be able to get the volume that you thought down there. So you would have, as you would with almost all other mining operations, a large impoundment area that you construct, obviously, to prevent any kind of a runoff, et cetera. It's going to be very interesting to see as we go forward with more emphasis on the establishment of U.S. sources of supply for all different things. If things that are perhaps considered to be deleterious for lithium and boron, as an example, for the purity of them, if they can't somehow be utilized in a way of themselves, I think like manganese, maybe calcium, I don't know. And again, this is Steve, who is not the metallurgist, but I'm just saying is that the technology continues to evolve. So you never know what might happen. And all the tailings could be reprocessed yet again. I mean, you see it in copper and gold. So, but yeah, we'll have a tailings impoundment area.
Excuse me, sorry. Some company management teams with lithium projects in Nevada have post-tax IRRs well below that in your PEA. Given Nevada Lithium is using the same lithium price assumption, how does Bonnie get such a strong IRR?
I think it's the grade. I think it always you start with the grade, because what that allows you to do, right, is to pump out more product on the back end for every pound of dirt that you're putting through. You know, look, would I love it if we had the same grades at surface? With no stripping on an open pit. In some ways, I would, because our mining costs would probably be lower. But by the same token, the mining method that we're looking at right now allows you to get to the highest grade material immediately, so you don't have to work your way through. Like ideally, with regards to an open pit, right? If you had the highest grade material you had right at the surface, then you would only work your way down necessarily until you hit your cutoff grade, but you'd be through your good stuff first. Okay, that's great from an NPV perspective, but I would argue it might actually shorten your mine life. Here we got to go down to get it. We don't think there's a problem going down to get it, but we can get it first. So it's the best that there is for the NPV. And the grades are so high. I mean, in some cases, when you start seeing 5, 6, 7, 8,000 ppm material, remember 10,000 ppm material is 1%. You're starting to talk about seeing some stuff you see with hard rock, right? Spodumene that they make concentrates out of, things like that. I think that that's the key. I think that the flow sheet that Fluor developed also is good. I think that, would we love to be able to knock down the sulfur cost? I'm not sure that we're not done with it. But the reality is, because the geology works with the boron coming in with the lithium, we're getting a substantial byproduct credit. I think that we got a very nice credit for what I don't consider to be an excessive price. I think we used $950 for boric acid in our PEA, which is a lot lower than some of our peers. So, I would say it starts with, it's all geology. It's grade, and it's the fact that the boron's coming in. That's what I think it is. Plus the fact, too, that you're just sitting in the best mining jurisdiction in the world with infrastructure right there. So that's the way I would attribute it to why the IRR is higher.
Thank you, Steve. I think we have time for one more question and then closing remarks. Sorry here. So I'm going to ask this question. Feel free. It's a good way to wrap it up, and then you can do any final closing remarks, and we'll call it a session here. What are the top 2 or 3 things that prospective investors push back against regarding the prospects for Nevada Lithium?
Well, to me, it clearly, people always have questions about borehole mining. It's the mining methodology. I think the reality is that our material is at depth. I don't think that the metallurgy is as much of a question mark, perhaps, as it once was. That's why we brought in Fluor to work on it, because Fluor has got QPs who have worked on essentially all of these projects. And I think that mark of approval that they put there answered a lot of questions for people. As I go back to, and water, look, and water is always a question. That's why, even though, I wish I could tell you that we had all the water rights, I just don't see that as this is going to be the bullet that kills Bonnie Claire. I mean, this is something that is essentially all people face when they're trying to develop things in the desert. And water is something that is going to be, not be argued over, but it's something that it's of value. And we know that people are going to extract value to get it. But the point is that the better the investment metrics of your project, the better the chances are of you getting that, basically getting all the components that you need. The borehole mining, I've had enough people talk to me who've been involved with it in various different ways, is something that I do not think is going to be an issue. In fact, I look at it, perhaps I'm the optimist. I think that the gains of efficiency are actually going to be higher than what have been modeled. And I'll tell you a very recent occurrence occurred in a totally different part of the world, in a different industry, that makes me think that way again. And it has to do with Freeport's Grasberg mine in Indonesia, which I was there, I can't remember if it was 15 years ago or whatever. It was basically one of the largest open pits in the world, copper and gold, up the top of a mountain. But when I was there, they were starting to design the large block cave underneath. And they recently, unfortunately, just had a huge, basically mud inflow down there that we don't know the extent of damage, but basically Grassberg's offline and people lost their lives, etc. But the point of that is that we talk about fluidity, we talk about plasticity in Bonnie Claire, right? This is not granite we're talking about. This is very soft material that at 3,000 feet or 1,000 meters, whatever you want to say, you can crumble in your hand. Okay, you hit it with water, it turns the mud to slurry. When we modeled essentially the borehole mine, if you look at it from above, it would look like a honeycomb, right? With a bunch of circles essentially that you saw that were touching each other on tangents. And if you think about that, the material in between there, it was not accounted for in the recovery. We don't think that's going to be the case. Now we can't prove it, but the reality is we think because of the water, because of the nature of the soil, et cetera, that material is going to flow, which means maybe you don't have to drill as many of these boreholes to get the material that you can suck up to the top. If that does, the economics get even better, and we have no reason to believe that it won't happen. Will we eventually want to do and have to do a borehole mining test? Yes. It's just we don't want to do it right now because of the cost, because it would be a pretty big ticket item for someone our size. However, we're exploring the potential to do it with other people who may want to be involved. And there's nothing definitive about that. I'm just telling you that I'm exploring other ways to try to find a way around that big ticket. But it's probably borehole mining is probably going to be something that is not going to be put to rest in investors' minds until they actually see it happen. Even though Cameco does it all the time I get it. It's at a nearer to surface than what we're doing it at. But this is the way I always think about investments, and this is how I'll run it out. Every investment, I should say, climbs a wall of worry. And I'm not promising that everything is going to happen perfectly here, that we're necessarily going to build Bonnie Claire, et cetera. But there's a lot of different ways to basically make value here in your investment. If you're going to worry about something and you're going to have something like borehole mining, that's going to be it. You want to have as many other things going in your favor as possible. So I always try to take the opportunity to list off all those other things that we have, which mitigate the potential for the borehole mining technology, which incidentally, I will tell you, is we're not convinced that it's the only possible way to get the material. We've been hearing from and going to be talking to more and more people about alternatives. And one of them I just mentioned might be a block cave, which I would argue would then be a different kind of a project. But the reality is that would not mean that the material is sterilized, that you could still get at it. And that's just one potential thing. But when you look at it, you've got the high lithium grades, you've got the boron coming in to reduce cost, you've got the infrastructure, you're right off a highway, you're in the best place in the world in Nevada to do this, you got power lines going overhead, you've got no neighbors, you got a huge drainage basin, and you've got hundreds of meters of other, high-grade lithium material and boron that people would kill to have. That's just the reality. We're open in three directions. Do we have the possibility to turn this into multiple projects or to upscale the projects? And the answer is yes to all of that. Now we got people who are coming in with technology that I would argue is not only revolutionary, but it's evolutionary, who have experience in dealing with things in different ways and looking at things out of the box. As an example, applying DLE against leachate, right? So pregnant leach solution instead of directly against the brine. You have all of that. Now you've got critical materials that are coming in that the U.S. government is terribly interested in. You've got the U.S. government bringing in, basically investment commitments from people who want to be strategic partners with the U.S. All of this happening at a time when we're just making ourselves known, at a time when lithium prices are still in the doghouse, but we know that they can't remain that way, or we're never going to have EVs or anything else manifest themselves in a meaningful way in the U.S. And I don't for a second believe that's what's going to happen. So if you take the borehole mining as your wall of worry, stack that up against all your other stuff. Remember what I always say too, we don't invest in companies like this, investments like this for S&P 500 returns. These are the kind of things that, you're here to basically take a risk on because you're going to have outsized returns. And when you stack up all the probabilities, I think Bonnie Claire looks great, certainly compared to anybody else, but I think in absolute terms as well. And that's how I would think about that particular topic. So hopefully that answered it.
Steve, great update as always. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone that attended, especially the ones that asked the questions. It's always great when we get so many questions like this. So Well, interactive event. If you did come in a little late, our team will have up the recording within the next couple of hours here, so keep out for that. But Steve, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, everyone.